questions, trying to get the answer to all my questions. And that was 1997, and it lasted 27 years. It was just honest questions, and I just was honestly trying to get to the bottom of it. And I'd go into these interviews just, not with a lot of ammo in my pocket. I'm really just want to know the facts. What's the facts of this dig site? And as I slowly accumulated information, I realized that the entire theory of evolution has collapsed. 27 years, we had interviewed 43 human evolution scientists. And during the course of these 27 years of filming all over the world, in the biggest dig sites, the biggest museums, the biggest universities of the world, there were 150 frauds. Frauds in the field of human evolution. Now, it means the purposeful and knowingly misleading the person you're talking to. And that would, in human evolution, that would be by a scientist altering a fossil. We recorded a lot of those. It would be a scientist knowingly altering a diagram to where it wasn't true, but he knew it wasn't true, but he published it anyway. It would be reporting facts that he knew or could be documented those are lies. And that's a very high bar. It would be very hard to catch a scientist in fraud. And yet I have 150 of these that I'm going to share with some of them with you. And I'm telling you, to your audience, you need to watch this video, because in a few book I released, and it was about the fossil record. It's called Evolution: The Grand Experiment. And basically, we went and interviewed scientists about their animal specialty. Like, this was dinosaurs, and this chart was from the Chicago Field Museum. And the Field Museum had these diagrams how dinosaurs evolved, with a bunch of lines splitting, and finally getting to the dinosaurs. But when we asked the experts, David Weishampel, who is the guru of dinosaur evolution, he gave us these numbers for the number of dinosaurs that had been found, large numbers of like 78 Tyrannosaurus dinosaur fossils. Not fossils, but different specimens, like different dinosaurs. And ceratopsians, I don't know, it's 377 ceratopsians. But according to them, there were no ancestors to any dinosaur. They just suddenly appeared. Then I made my second book. And by the way, all these books and all these shows are being filmed simultaneously over these 27 years. It just took a while, This was Living Fossils. I made a prediction that if creation was true, okay, evolution doesn't look like it happened in the fossil record, but I said, but if creation was true, there should be a predicted what you should find. And imagine this, if there was creation in 6 days, and then there was a flood, 1,000 or 2,000 years ago, or whatever the number is, and then it was like the flood mixed up everything that was alive on the planet, kind of like one of those snow globes your grandma had on her desk. So if you just took all the animals that were created at once, and that, according to the Bible, that would be the dinosaurs, that would be the humans, that would be the birds, that would be the lizards, everything that's living today plus everything that's ever lived, they would all be at the same time alive, more or less, at the time of the flood. Then it would be shake the snow globe, and everything should be mixed up together. So my prediction was that if creation was true, and if there was a flood, we should find modern animals next to the dinosaurs. Do you follow that logic?
Sure. That makes sense. Absolutely.
So we could photograph them all. And then I realized a lot of these look like modern animals, but they're all renamed. And then when I started asking them, have you ever found an animal or plant in your dinosaur dig site that looked kind of like a modern plant or animal? Oh yeah, we got lots of those. What was going on is they were renaming them. And see, this was very dark, because they were renaming it. Like, for example, this fossil was found at a dinosaur dig site. It looks just like the modern redwood plant. If you can see that on screen, can you see that on screen?
Yes, I do.
The plant looks just like the fossil. And this this fossil was found next to a dinosaur. So that would mean that the redwoods were alive during the dinosaurs. And once we figured this out, that they were renaming them, see, they changed the species and genus names most often of these plants. Look at the cone here from the redwood. That's a modern cone, and here's the fossil. It looks like it's a redwood cone, but it's found next to a dinosaur. And it went on and on and on. Like, if you look at this is a modern nautilus shellfish, and then here's a fossil nautilus that was found next to the dinosaur. It looks the same, but they changed the species and genus name from nautilus to Cynoceras. And then if you go to a different one, if you cut the nautilus in half and look inside, and then take a different dinosaur nautilus fossil and cut it in half, you can tell the audience that doesn't have the pictures in front of him, do these two look exactly the same, Anthony?
They look identical to me. That's amazing.
Identical. And this is when I finally saw these two, I said, no, I'm not just stupid that I can't see why they're renaming this. They are just changing the name. I'm serious. And like, if you look at the genus names, they change it from nautilus to Cynoceras. And what they did is they changed the genus and species name to create the illusion of evolution. And ducks next to dinosaurs, loons, they found iguanas, boa constrictors, possums, snakes, lizards, et cetera, et cetera. But the way they have got away with this is that at the dinosaur museum, or at the natural history museums, they never display the duck next to the dinosaur. Have you ever been to a museum and seen a duck sitting on the back of a T-Rex?
No.
But it should be there. If they found one, it should be there. Have you ever been to a museum and seen a boa constrictor wrapped around the bottom leg of a T-Rex?
No.
No. Have you ever been to a natural history museum, seen a T-Rex or a Triceratops with a box turtle? You know, your little box turtle you find in the woods, next on the ground, or an iguana, or a possum. See, they have created the illusion of evolution, and it's very dark that they did this, and they do this. They should have all corrected this when my book came out, called Living Fossils, is volume 3 of the series, and it's called Untold Stories of Human Evolution. It just came out, and basically this covers the 5 ape-men that were made out of ordinary mammals. And so these ape-men, they would like you just to not even ask about, because like this one, the Libyan hominid, was made out of a dolphin rib. Yes, you heard that correctly. A dolphin rib was misinterpreted as a collarbone of an ape-man. And it wasn't just any ape-man. This was an upright walking ape-man. And this was in the American Museum of Natural History's magazine called Natural History. And this one, Orsi-Man, was made out of out of a donkey skull. And this one, called Australopithecus prometheus, it was made out of a cat, like a leopard, a dog, like a dog-like family, like a canid, like a wolf kind of, or jackal. It was made out of the toe bones of horses that they thought were the collarbones of this ape-man. And, you know, then there's the Nebraska man was made out of a pig too. So the first book was just the 43 scientists that promoted ape-men that were actually made out of mammals, like ordinary mammals, like non-primate mammals, like how stupid could you be kind of a thing. Story came out because this dolphin rib story came out because the scientist, his name is Dr. Noel Boaz, he was from, I think, one of the New York City universities. He was a professor there. He crossed swords with Dr. Johansen, and he said, my ape-man is better than your ape-man, you know, the scientist who found Lucy. And Johansen and his friend, Dr. Tim White, got mad at him and say, we're going to burn you, and we're going to take down your ape-man. You're saying Lucy's not a good ape-man. Well, we're going to look at your ape-man, the Libyan hominid. And this, I think, came out in 1983 or something. And they were the scientists, his colleagues, in other words. identified that it was a dolphin rib, and they did it in the journal articles. But the bigger point is that these 43 scientists had university professorships, they found museums, they wrote hundreds of books, and yet they couldn't even identify the correct group of mammals. Should only be primates, okay? The last book, and again, this book was just released, and it's called 9 Categories of Overturned Ape-Men. Ape-Men, not just the ones made out of mammals, but the others. And there's been 232 ape-men species that have been identified and then overturned. And that's a lot of ape-men. And I was like, what were they? What did they turn out to be? And there were so many of these things, I had to group them just to kind of make sense of it. And so I basically grouped the 232 ape-men species that have been overturned into 9 different categories. Like one category, they turned out to be just monkey bones. Those were Dr. Dart's and Dr. Giebert's ape-men. One category turned out to be just ordinary ape bones, not modern apes, but extinct apes, but they were just ordinary apes that they were interpreted as ape-men. One group was ordinary, recently buried human bones, you know, like Aunt Jane, who died 15 years ago, and Uncle Billy, who died, 40 years ago, and great-grandma Smith. These people were buried, and then an evolution scientist came upon their fossils and named them as ape-men. And this would be the Homo capensis in South Africa. This would be Homo cinnamento, Homo capitulinatus, Homo pempeus in Argentina. There was 5 of these. And then another group was ape-men that were made out of reptiles. There was only one of those. It was a crocodile bone. Another one was ape-men made out of humans that were buried during the Ice Age with the reindeer and the muskox and things like that in Europe. But they were just humans, but they were buried with Ice Age animals, and they're not ape-men, they're just humans. So during the course of these 43 interviews, or whatever the number is, with the evolution scientists, there were many instances of fraud that were revealed by the scientists or that became apparent during our 27 years of filming. Because we also got to get into the museums and film the original fossils in the museum vaults, because we were filming for a national broadcast on human evolution. That's how we got access. Evolution scientists tend not to pronounce that their colleagues are doing the frauds until after they die. Once they die and they lose all their political capital to do retribution on them, their colleagues then come out and say, hey, that was a fraud, that was wrong, this was wrong. But they never tell you while we're being spoon-fed this crud on, Discovery Channel. Toomai, as you can see, was on the cover of Time magazine in 2002 and Nature, indicating this is the big kahuna that we've been waiting for, the earliest upright walking ape-man. But the scientist that's promoting it infuriated his colleague who actually was there when it was found. And the colleague, Dr. Alain Bouffalon, told me the correct story and showed me that this was fraud. This thing is fraud times 4, okay? Points. Number 1, the spinal cord hole on the bottom of the skull is more towards the center, like a human skull. Therefore, it walked upright. So it had an upright walking ape-man because of the hole for the spinal cord. The hole on the spinal cord, real quick, it's right here. You see that? It's that.
Yes.
Yeah. So, because in humans, it's more in the center, but in apes, it's more towards the back. And his second point was, when it was found, it was buried in rock. And the way we know it's the oldest ape-man is because we then dated the rock, which is circular reasoning, but dated the rock, and the rock turned out to be 7 million years old. That was his second point. And the third point was that there were no other bones found next to this animal. It was just the skull. There was no leg bones, there was no arm bones. And yet all of this is fraud. Now let me show you why. Dr. Brunet, who's promoting this currently, and he is immediately in fame. He's being interviewed by Time magazine and Nature and all this stuff. He wasn't even in Chad, North Africa, when this was found. His partner was Dr. Bouffalon, who he alienated. And Dr. Bouvillain gave me the pictures from the day the skull was found.
Mm-hmm.
This is a skull of Tumai, and it's laying on the sand. And this was taken just maybe 2 hours after it's all found. They went back to get the cameras. They couldn't believe it. They found this primate skull. And you'll notice something. It is not in a rock layer.
Oh, yeah.
It's just laying on top of the sand. And Dr. Brunet told us and wrote it in his journal articles that it had to be dug out of the rock so that, so they could remove it. And it's just laying on top of the sand. See, in the Jurab Desert in Chad, where this fossil, and there's fossils all over just laying on top of the sand, you just pick them up. You just pick them up, look at them, throw them back down if you're not interested, if the wrong kind of animal you're looking for. And so it was a lie that he dug it out of the rock. It was a lie that they could date the rock layer. That's the first 2 lies. And then look at this picture. What is this bone right here? It's about
like
a foot
femur.
and a half. It's a femur. Yeah. How did you know that it was? Yeah, that's a femur. I'm surprised you could identify it, but that is correct. It was a femur. And Dr. Brunet hid the fact that there was a femur found for 17 years.
Wow.
And there's a reason he did, because the femur looks like a chimp femur. I'm going to show you that in a bit here.
Mm-hmm.
And if he had told everybody he had found a femur next to this skull, and then they said, oh, well, that looks like a chimp femur, they wouldn't think this was an ape-man, because chimpanzees walk on all fours. They don't walk upright, His whole point was this creature walked upright like a human being. So we took this femur, the photographs that were published of it in the journal article, and this is that femur, but it's photographed 4 different ways. The front view, the back view, the outside view, and the inside view, okay? Mm-hmm. And so to match that, I took a picture of a modern femur of a chimpanzee, a modern chimpanzee. And the same views, the front view of the femur, chimp femur, the back view of the chimp femur, the side view, and the outside view, inside and outside view. These are the exact same views of this. And watch what happens. And this is really good in the video. Everybody needs to watch this video. It's amazing. When you put the femur fossil over the chimp, look what happens.
Wow.
It is
like a match to me.
It's a perfect match.
Gosh.
And that's why he kept, I think that would be why he would keep it hidden and secret and lie about it. I mean, he specifically said, I think it was in 2002 or 3, in his journal article that was written in French, he said there were no extremity bones found next to the skull. And yet this one is a foot and a half away and it looks like a chimp. So that's another lie. And then the last lie is his hole at the bottom of the skull, the foramen magnum hole. He actually moved it. And he's not the first scientist to move a foramen magnum. The scientists who discuss a previous scientist, 120 years earlier in Paris, did this with the first Neanderthal skeleton. His name is Marcel Boule. He moved the foramen magnum and then said it was an ape-man. And so this guy's going to do the same thing. And so that's why I was tipped off on this. First of all, it's odd that when we flew to Paris to interview him, and he didn't know anything was wrong with that I was questioning evolution, he would not let me photograph the fossils on his desk, or the fossil copies, even just the copies. I was like, we're doing a national interview with you about your fossil, and you won't let me photograph your skull? That's very odd. In fact, it raised my not only my ire, but it also raised my suspicion that there's something goofy here.
Yeah.
And then what it is he found the skull, he CAT scanned it, then he realized it was all deformed, and then he took the CAT scan pictures, and then he moved bones around, and during that process he moved the foramen magnum, and I'm going to show you how he did it. But the most spectacular thing is that in his final version there's bones missing, and that's very important because that didn't show up on his initial CAT scans. Yeah. That's very important because you need to have missing bones so that you can move things around. And that's what they did with Neanderthal 120 years earlier. Now watch this. Here is how you move a foramen magnum. Here's a picture of a gorilla skull, and here's a picture of a human skull. The gorilla skull, the foramen magnum, the hole for the spinal cord, is in the back, or more towards the back. In the human, it's more towards the center, and that's because the head is balanced on the top of the head. And Toomai, when they found him, this is what it looked like when they found him. It was all distorted. You can see the foramen magnum is all distorted there. It's not round. And look at here, the teeth, instead of lining up with out here, you know, to the side like the human did, the teeth are pointing at the foramen magnum, which means the whole thing is twisted and cockeyed, okay? So what he did was this bone that I marked here in red, this bone marked here in red is this bone right here. It's part of the occiput, but it's in front of the foramen magnum right there. And he had two choices when he had finished with this CAT scan. He could move this end down and move this out, and then it would be an ape. Or he could move this end and move it up, and it would be a human or an ape man. And he chose to move this up instead of moving this down. And then he claimed, you know, without telling anybody, and by the way, he won't share his CAT scans not only with me, but his colleagues. Colleague after colleague has come to visit him. He won't let them see the fossils. He won't let them see the photos of the fossils. He won't let them see the CAT scans. He won't let them verify the work. He hid the femur. He is a slimy little dog, I'm telling you. And that's how that whole thing got born. It was one fraud after another fraud after another fraud. It was 4 frauds in all for Dr. Michel Brunet from Paris for his famous ape-man, the most famous ape-man currently in all museums, Toomai. So how's that for 4 frauds, but we still have 146 to go?
Yeah, this is breaking my heart because you would think people in the scientific community would call him out, considering that they're not able to examine the evidence themselves. I mean, what kind of issue is this that no one else is allowed to see the actual evidence and come to conclusions on their own? I thought the scientific process was supposed to be, you know, repeated over and over and over again, and now they're not letting anyone else see it. It's so obvious it's not funny.
And it is obvious it's not funny. And the reason is that there's political retribution within the field. You know, that field only has about 300 or 400 really important scientists in it. And if one scientist calls out another scientist and says, your ape-man's a problem, and really goes at his jugular vein, you know, in the New York Times, that scientist that's accusing him will be destroyed. And that happened with the dolphin rib guy when he went after Johansson, and they destroyed him for calling out Lucy as a problematic fossil. So they are not honest with the public. They might be making little, you know, innuendos in their articles or very subtle things, but not on the front page of the New York Times saying this fossil is very problematic. It's all quiet. They don't want to cause a wave. They don't want to have their articles or their funding canceled. So they just shut up and say it's a problem. I'm going to show you the next 10 frauds, and it's from this diagram. You will recognize this diagram. Everybody in the audience will recognize this diagram. It was printed in 1965 in the Time Life book, Early Man, and it shows one small ape evolving into 15 ape-man species into a modern human. And the ape is getting taller and taller and standing more upright, and finally he gets to the modern man. And we interviewed the scientist who made this chart for Time Life book. His name was F. Clark Howell. Now, he died after we interviewed him. But he died, we got the chance to interview him, and then we got to interview his colleagues, and we got to interview his students. And it turns out that Clark Howell committed 10 acts of frauds in this one chart. And, you know, people don't understand what I mean by the word fraud. I'm gonna redefine it one more time so nobody thinks. When I'm saying fraud, I'm not saying the fossil doesn't exist. I'm saying the scientist is knowingly and misleading the audience or his customer or whatever into something that he knows is wrong. That's fraud. It's knowingly misleading. It's not that the fossil is fake or that it's not a real bone. He's knowingly doing this, okay? So most people, when they see this chart, you ask them, what's going on here? They'd say, well, this small little ape kept standing up, and he got bigger and bigger and bigger, and finally he had some tools, and then there he is, modern man. And you would say to them, where are the Ape-Men? Well, the first animal is an ape, and the last man is a modern man, so the Ape-Men are the animals in between. And this chart, I don't show it here because I cut it out of the book, but in the book, the chart is labeled "On the Road to Homo sapiens." Okay, it's on the road to Homo sapiens. So in other words, these animals are on the road to Homo sapiens. They are human ancestors, okay? But when he made this chart, and we learned this through his writings, the interviews that we did, and the book itself, is that he knew that this first animal, Pleopithecus, was like a modern gibbon and did not evolve into humans. It was not on the road to Homo sapiens. He also knew the second one, Proconsul, was a chimpanzee-like animal. It was an ape and was not an ancestor of humans. So that would be fraud too. The third one, Dryopithecus, was a chimpanzee-like ape. It was extinct, but it was not an ancestor to humans, according to Dr. Howell, who made the chart. But he puts it on the chart anyway. Oreopithecus, he knew, was an ape. It was not ancestral to humans, but he puts it on the road to Homo sapiens chart. And he did that also for this one here, Paranthropus. He knew this was a gorilla-like, ape-like creature, and he knew it was not ancestor to humans and was not on the road to Homo sapiens, and yet he put it in the chart. So there's 5 frauds there, and then you scoot over to the right, the last 5 animals before the modern man, he knew were Homo sapiens. See, you can't put 6, in a chart of 15 animals, you can't put 6 Homo sapiens in a row and say, look, there's human evolution. And it can't be on the road to Homo sapiens. If the chart is called the road to Homo sapiens, you only get 1 Homo sapiens at the end.
Right.
But it's Homo sapiens, Homo sapiens, Homo sapiens, Homo sapiens, Homo sapiens. That's what he knew when he made the chart. And so this was not a chart on the road to Homo sapien. 10 of the 14 animals were fraud. Plus, these are the frauds of Clark Howell. There's other frauds here, but that's not the point I'm making. I'm saying the guy who made this chart knew it was wrong, and it was immensely influential in convincing people that evolution scientists had the Ape-Men. That was in Africa. We just did F. Clark Howell's chart. That was in Time Life. There was 10 frauds there. This next one is called Homo habilis. Homo habilis. Anybody that's gone through college science has heard about it. It's supposed to be, and it's by the way, it's on display at museums currently. And this creature is supposed to be halfway between an ape-sized creature, which would be about 3.5, 4 feet tall, with a brain around 500 cc's, and a human, 5.5 feet tall with 1,000 cc brain. It's supposed to be halfway between there. The brain of Homo habilis then would be, if it's an intermediate creature, if it's an ape-man, it would have a brain of around 600 to 700 cc's, okay? And it would be about 4.5 feet tall. It turns out this creature was only 500 cc's. He enlarged the brain repeatedly on multiple specimens, and he created an ape-man out of what turns out to be Australopithecus, not an ape-man. And I want to show you how he did it and why he did it. His first fossil that was found, the scientist's name is Philip Tobias, and he's from the University of Witwatersrand, and he worked up in Olduvai Gorge with Louis Leakey and another scientist by the name of Napier, N-A-P-I-E-R. And Louis Leakey and Mary Leakey found this skull, and it's called OH7, and this is the one they said is the first or the type specimen for Homo habilis. It's the one that all scientists will look at and judge if their fossils that they find later is a Homo habilis or not. But he enlarged this. He added bones to the skull that were not part of the skull. And not to sound prideful, but I was the one that figured this out. So this picture in black and white is what Dr. Tobias placed in his scientific monograph in the 1990s of what the fossil looks like. It's a black and white photograph. And you look at it the first time, and there's no letters on it by him. That I've added those letters on there. There's really nothing seems strange or unusual about it. But Debbie and I then flew to Tanzania, and we met with the the former national director of the National Museum of Tanzania, where this fossil is stored. And we told him we'd like to photograph all the fossils that they found in Olduvai Gorge. And so he pulled this one out. It's called OH7. It's the type specimen for Homo habilis. And I took a picture of it. Now, I didn't know that I was going to be comparing it to this black and white, so it's at a slightly different angle. You can see it just not, but it's the same fossil, okay?
Sure.
But it's just
I can see
taken,
that.
the camera lens is a little bit more north than south and whatever, you know. And then when I got home and I put this photograph next to his picture, same fossil, it's like these don't even look the same. There's something crazy wrong here with this picture. And you can see that in his fossil, there's a big area of bone called B, and on mine, there is no B. It's a big piece is just missing. Like, what is B? And I was like, what? I couldn't explain it. Then I started scrutinizing his photograph. It's like, this is all plaster. You see that, Anthony? It's all it's not bone. So he puts, you wouldn't know it because it's a black and white picture. So he puts plaster, a large piece of plaster, to increase the size of the skull so he can say that it's a large-brained ape-man. He's enlarging the skull. And this isn't the first time. He's going to do this multiple times, and I'm going to show you that in a bit. And so, by the way, you don't put plaster and enlarge the type specimen. The type specimen is what everybody's going to judge it for just based on its own merits. You don't enlarge it, okay? You don't put plaster on it and say, I think the bone went out further here. Then, when we looked at it, it's like, look at this bone, this part of the skull here on OH7, where I have marked it A. You don't notice it in the black and white, it looks fine. But on mine, it looks a little funny. It doesn't quite look like the same. And you flip this skull over, and there it is. That's part A there. And look, it looks nothing like the rest of the skull.
Wow.
You see that?
Yes.
A looks like a mismatch, and yet it's connected with a straight line. Now, straight lines are suspicious when you're putting together puzzles, because any puzzle piece that's straight can go to another straight piece. And if it was a good puzzle-like fit that was perfect, you'd say, well, it just maybe it got discolored because it was out in the sun or something like that. But no, it's attached by a straight line, and then the straight line wasn't long enough, so I had to put plaster in there too. And I thought that I was like, I can't believe it. So I was like, I'm gonna just read this. These monographs are so boring. They're the most boring thing you could read. You know, this is a 400-page monograph about these fossils. I mean, really, who wants to sit around and read them? But I did it for you. I took one for the team, and lo and behold, he makes an unusual statement in the monograph. He said that the right skull piece, which is the type specimen, was, quote, pieced together from a number of fragments found separately. In other words, he might have found the skull here, but he found that other part 30 yards away, and it could have been from a different animal. Well, that is a very, very suspicious fossil, and I say it's fraudulent. Even if you accept the other piece, the plaster on there is fraud, and this is a type specimen. No one called him out on it, and this was the first of 3 frauds. I'm going to show you the other 2 real quickly so I don't lose you here as my audience. His second fraud was this one, and this one is even more spectacular because we got to interview his colleague about it. So the story is, in 1976, Dr. Tobias's team found these, I think it's like 14 fragments of bone, and Dr. Tobias thought he had found another Homo habilis, okay? Now, he wants it to be a big-brained ape-man, okay? That's the point. And because he's the guy that's promoting it, and he named it, so he wants it to be a Homo habilis. And he asked his colleague, Dr. Ron Clark, pay attention to that name, Dr. Clark, to assemble the bones, because Dr. Clark was the man who assembled skulls. He was really good figuring out where the fragments go, where they attach to each other. And he assembled these 14 fragments into this skull here. You see that, Anthony?
Yep.
Can you see where I'm pointing? Okay.
Yes.
Now this skull here, it's the front view, but there's two more views over here. This is the bottom view of this same skull, and this is a side view of the same skull, okay? Dr. Clark finishes this, putting it together in 1984, and he brings it back to Dr. Tobias, who fraudulently did the other bone of Homo habilis, OH7, and says, well, I got your skull done, here it is, and hands this to him. Now, how do I know all this detail? Because we interviewed Ron Clark about this, and he's about ready to accuse his colleague of fraud on camera here. So on camera, Dr. Clark is describing this whole process of what happened. Now, Tobias is dead now, so he can just pretty much shoot him down. He gave it to Tobias, and Tobias told Clark, according to Clark, this skull is too small. This is supposed to be a large brain ape man. And he says, do you think you could take it apart and make it bigger? And Ron Clark is like dumbfounded on camera in this interview. And he said, take it apart? You can't just take it apart because you want to make it bigger. He said, these bones were put together because they matched for either the midline or, you know, a vein going across the bone edge or something. Things that you could see that this piece goes with this piece. And you just can't separate them because you want a bigger ape man. And he said, well, okay. And that was the end of the discussion. But Dr. Tobias was not deterred. He then asked his colleague, Dr. Darren Curnow, who was basically a graduate student there for a couple of years, just working under Dr. Tobias. And Tobias goes to Dr. Curnow, who had not a lot of experience of assembling skulls, and he says, Dr. Curnow, do you think you could take this skull that Dr. Clark assembled, take it apart and see if you can rework it and make it bigger? And that's what Dr. Curnow did. Now, here's the before. This is Dr. Clark's skull, and here's Dr. Curnow's skull. You can see how it went from this size to this size. And these pictures are perfectly proportioned because I took these two in the same frame. This is the same photograph, so there's no enlargement. This is the photo. And this is the side view. He made it from this to much longer, and he enlarged it up to, it went from 500 cc's up to like 700 cc's. And, you know, we did it. We did find an ape man. It's called Homo habilis, and this one is STW53, just about as large as the other fake one, OH7. And then if that wasn't enough, he did it again. And here's another one, OH16. He had this skull. It was assembled this way, and you can see the pieces are all matching and touching. And he blew it up with plaster and spread it out and made it a large brain ape man.
Dr. Carl, I'm no scientist, but I went to second grade. I could tell when one skull is bigger than the other.
And it's ridiculous. And that's 3 in a row from one scientist, you know. And he also fraudulently created a brain size chart. And I'm not going to get into it, but he changed the size of human brains so that it looked like it was stepwise progression of apes to Homo habilis to Homo erectus to human brain. He altered the numbers on that, which was his 4th fraud. It's extraordinary, extraordinary.
Gosh, this is unbelievable when you see it, like right there with the pictures, and you see all the extra plaster that shouldn't be there, and how on the right hand side you see how it all fits together perfectly. It just like you said, this is fraud. This is an intentional idea to fool somebody.
Yeah, to create an ape man out of where there was no ape man.